In the breast pocket of an American machinist, the most important thing was not always a blueprint and not always a pencil. Sometimes it was a small piece of cold steel, capable of measuring errors so small the naked eye had no chance of seeing them. A micrometer, a caliper, a dial indicator. Tools that looked almost humble, yet decided whether a shaft would shake a bearing apart after a few hours of operation, whether a mold would close perfectly, or whether an entire production line worth millions of dollars would run the way its designers intended. In the world of precision machining, there is no room for guesswork. There is only measurement. And for more than a century, the name stamped into those measuring tools in countless American machine shops was often Starrett. That is what makes this story unusual. America once had many famous tool brands. A great number of names that had seemed inseparable from the American factory disappeared, were bought out, broken apart, moved overseas, or reduced to little more than labels attached to products made somewhere else. But Starrett did not follow that path. From 1880 into the 21st century, the company remained tied to the same town in Massachusetts, tied to the same tradition of precision manufacture, and committed to keeping a core part of its production where it began. In an industrial world where globalization swept away even larger names, Starrett endured as an almost unfashionable exception. So how did a farmer, inventor, and entrepreneur named Laroy Sunderland Starrett turn a small Massachusetts town called Athol into America's tool town? Why did a company making combination squares, micrometers, calipers, and dial indicators become part of the invisible foundation of precision manufacturing? And perhaps most importantly, why, at the very moment so much of American tool-making faltered, did Starrett stay home, keep producing, and survive? If you enjoy stories about the companies, people, and decisions that shaped the industrial world, subscribe to the Gear Archive and follow along. To understand Starrett, you have to start with a simple but decisive truth. There is no modern industry without precise measurement. The finest lathe in the world is useless if the operator has no reliable way to confirm the cut is the correct size. The most expensive milling machine on earth is still just iron and motion if no one can verify that the surface just machined is actually parallel, square, or concentric within tolerance. Manufacturing is the act of giving material a shape. Measurement is the act of proving that the shape is right. Starrett lived at that intersection, where technical trust is translated into numbers. Laroy S. Starrett was born in 1836 in Maine and grew up in an America that was still taking industrial form. He did not come from a powerful manufacturing dynasty, and he did not begin life as a factory owner with deep capital behind him. He was a very 19th century American type, practical, mechanically gifted, and convinced that a small improvement, properly applied, could become an entire business. Before he founded the company that bore his name, Starrett was already a serious inventor. He understood hand tools, understood the daily realities of shop work, and most importantly, understood that a tool had value only if it helped its user work faster, more accurately, and with repeatable results. One of Laroy Starrett's earliest and most important inventions was the combination square. On paper, it was simple: a steel rule paired with a sliding head that allowed a user to measure, mark, check 90 degrees, check 45 degrees, measure depth, and perform several other tasks with one instrument. But that simplicity was precisely the genius of it. In a machine shop or a carpenter's shop, workers did not need elegant objects. They needed one tool that could replace 3 or 4 others without sacrificing trust. Starrett understood that. He was not inventing for a showroom. He was inventing for the bench, for oily hands, for rolled-up sleeves, for the pace of actual work. In 1880, Laroy S. Starrett founded the L. S. Starrett Company in Athol, Massachusetts. At first glance, Athol may seem like an unlikely choice, but the decision made perfect sense in the industrial geography of New England at the time. The region had a deep mechanical tradition, access to skilled labor, rail connections, capital, iron and steel suppliers, and just as importantly, a culture that respected workmanship. Athol was not yet legendary, but it sat in exactly the kind of environment where a precision manufacturer could grow. Starrett did not simply build a factory. He planted it in ground already accustomed to mechanical discipline. The company's earliest years were built around the combination square, but Starrett expanded quickly into other measuring and marking tools. That was a strategic move. If the business had depended on a single successful invention, it might have become no more than a footnote in American industrial history. Instead, the company grew by a different logic. It used one iconic product to establish credibility, then used that credibility to move deeper into the world of precision measurement. From squares to steel rules, from dividers to micrometers, from gauge blocks to dial indicators, Starrett gradually placed itself at every layer of inspection and layout work. The timing could hardly have been better. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, American manufacturing was moving from shop-scale production toward system-scale production. Firearms, machine tools, clocks, bicycles, locomotives, and later automobiles and aircraft all depended on the same principle. Parts had to be interchangeable within tolerance limits. The idea of interchangeable parts was not new by then, but making it work at scale required an entirely new culture of measurement. Factories needed tools that would produce the same answer on different benches, in different hands, in different cities. Error could no longer be a personal matter. It had to be standardized, controlled, and confined. Starrett grew with that need. The company was not simply selling steel and screws. It was selling confidence that a measurement taken in Athol meant the same thing as a measurement taken in Cleveland, Detroit, or Pittsburgh. To machinists, that was priceless. In many industries, a brand survives on advertising. In precision measurement, it survives on something far harsher. The user must believe that when the micrometer closes, it reads true. When the square touches a reference surface, the edge is actually straight. When the dial indicator checks runout, it reflects the part's error, rather than creating one of its own. Lose that trust once, and the brand can collapse. Starrett lasted because for generations it rarely allowed that breach to happen. Laroy Starrett died in 1922, but by then the company had already moved beyond dependence on its founder. That is a transition many businesses never survive. Countless early 20th century American firms were so closely identified with the technical force of the founder that when that person died, the company's spirit frayed with them. With Starrett, Laroy's most important legacy was not merely a portfolio of patents. It was a philosophy. The tool had to serve real work. It had to be precise. It had to be durable. And it had to feel trustworthy in the hand. As the 20th century moved into the age of war and mass production, Starrett became even more important. The two world wars were not only military events, they were gigantic tests of industrial capacity. To produce weapons, engines, gun mounts, optical equipment, communications hardware, aircraft, tanks, ships, and endless replacement parts, the United States needed more than factories. It needed measurement standards that held across thousands of factories. Whether a rifle could be assembled quickly, whether an engine ran smoothly, whether an aircraft component could carry load, all depended on whether real dimensions matched the drawing within tolerance. In that environment, companies like Starrett became essential links in the chain, even if they rarely appeared on propaganda posters. In the first half of the 20th century, the company continued expanding both its product line and its factory capacity. Precision measuring tools demanded a difficult combination of skills: consistent metallurgy, fine machining, grinding, heat treatment, graduations, calibration, miniature mechanism design, and repeat production at extremely low levels of error. This was not the kind of product that could be done well merely by chasing cheap labor. It depended on process knowledge accumulated over a very long time. Later, that would become one of the reasons Starrett proved more resilient than many of its peers under the pressure of globalization. You can relocate a simple assembly line relatively quickly. Relocating an entire culture of tolerance, calibration skill, and manufacturing discipline is something else entirely. That matters because of what Starrett actually made. A good steel rule is not just a strip of steel with numbers on it. It requires stable material, accurate edges, clear graduations, resistance to warping, a quality finish, and reliable repeatability. A good micrometer is more demanding still. The screw thread must be precise. The measuring faces must be hard and flat. The measuring force must be consistent. The ratchet or friction thimble must feel stable and controlled. The frame must be rigid enough not to distort meaningfully under use. A dial indicator must transmit tiny motion into smooth needle movement with minimal backlash and minimal lag. This is a world where the difference between a fine tool and a poor one often lies in details invisible to outsiders, but immediately obvious to skilled users. Part of Starrett's success came from not trying to sell to everyone. The company sold to people who genuinely needed accuracy. That created a very particular kind of brand strength. When your tools live in the hands of the most demanding users, and you survive there, your reputation becomes more durable than any marketing campaign. A machinist trusted Starrett not because of a slogan, but because after 10 years on the job, the micrometer still came back to zero, the square still checked true, and the indicator still told the truth while setting up a rotating part at speed. Across the 20th century, Starrett did not stand still with its traditional products. The company continued developing inspection tools, measurement systems, and later moved into electronic and optical measurement as well. But the core identity of the brand remained the same: precision, mechanical, hand tools. That was both a strength and a risk. It was a strength because that was where trust had been built most deeply. It was a risk because many American firms that excelled at refined mechanical products struggled to adapt to the electronic and digital age. What stands out about Starrett is that it neither abandoned its inheritance nor allowed itself to be trapped by it. It moved forward in measured steps, while trying to preserve the sense of a toolmaker's standard. By the middle of the 20th century, American industry had reached its peak, and Starrett was in almost the ideal position to benefit from it. Automotive, aerospace, defense, machine tools, electrical equipment, engines, stamping dies, plastic molds, sheet metal work, industrial maintenance, all of it depended on measurement. Starrett, therefore, appeared everywhere, but quietly. The company did not build the car. It did not manufacture the jet engine. It did not launch the ship. But it was part of the technical language that allowed those things to be built to size. In that sense, Starrett lived in the shadow of larger industrial achievements, and that shadow became a source of strength. A company supplying the foundation of many industries at once is less dependent on the fate of any single market. Then the environment changed. From the 1970s onward, labor costs rose, international competition intensified, and many American firms discovered that they could move production to lower-cost regions, outsource, or transform themselves into brand-owning marketing companies rather than actual manufacturers. In many sectors, this shift became nearly irreversible. In basic measuring tools, especially at the lower end of the market, the pressure was even greater. Products once considered part of the pride of the American factory began arriving from Japan, then Taiwan, then South Korea, then China, and later through increasingly complex global supply chains. A great many brands did not hold. Some failed outright. Some were acquired. Some survived only as names applied to contract-made goods. It is in that context that Starrett's continued production in Athol became remarkable. Not everything the company sold was necessarily made in one place at all times. And like any global industrial firm, Starrett developed operations beyond the United States. But the original factory remained active, and the brand remained connected to domestic production rather than merely domestic memory. That is what makes the company worth studying. Why did Starrett manage it? Part of the answer lies in product position. If you compete at the bottom of the market, where buyers care only about price, it is extraordinarily difficult to maintain high-cost production. But if you compete where reliability, repeatability, fit and finish, and brand trust shape the buying decision, you have more room to breathe. Starrett was not the cheapest company, and in many periods it did not try to be. It relied on an old industrial truth that still carries weight. A measuring tool should not be bought because it is cheap, but because it eliminates a far more expensive risk. Another reason was the inertia of skill. A factory that makes precision measurement tools is not just a building full of machines. It is an accumulation of process knowledge, hand skill, inspection standards, heat-treating expertise, assembly experience, and a culture that does not tolerate deviation. Those things can be weakened if they are broken up or moved too aggressively. Many American firms in precision industries discovered too late that when they relocated production to optimize a short-term balance sheet, they were not just losing domestic jobs, they were losing industrial memory, the hardest thing of all to rebuild. Starrett appears to have understood that danger more clearly than many of its rivals. That does not mean the company's path was ever smooth. The 20th century and the beginning of the 21st brought one challenge after another. Technological change, international competition, shifts in American manufacturing, recessions, changes in trade, education, automation, digital metrology, and the recurring question of how to carry an old industrial brand into a new generation of engineers and machinists. But Starrett remained viable in part because it represented a need that never disappears. No matter how advanced a CNC machine becomes, no matter how sophisticated 3D measurement software grows, manufacturing still depends on trustworthy physical references at the ground level. A shop may have a coordinate measuring machine, but it still needs rules, micrometers, gauge blocks, indicators, and squares. New technology does not erase old technology. It stacks on top of it. That is why when you walk into an American machine shop, especially one with deep traditions, you so often find Starrett everywhere. A steel rule in a drawer, a set of micrometers in a wooden case, a dial indicator on a magnetic base, a precision square beside a surface plate, a radius gauge set, a feeler gauge. A machinist may be happy to argue for hours about CNC controls and cutting strategies, but when it comes time to quickly verify a dimension, he often reaches for the tool that has been part of the job for decades, an old Starrett instrument that still works exactly as it should. From a branding standpoint, that is a tremendous advantage. In many industries, loyalty weakens over time. In measuring tools, loyalty can last half a lifetime because the products themselves last so long and become embedded in professional habit. A machinist who learns with Starrett at 20 may still use Starrett at 60. If the company preserves quality, that occupational memory becomes an extraordinary asset. If it betrays that trust, the fall is severe. So the Starrett story is not only about surviving globalization, it is about preserving an unwritten contract with working tradesmen and inspectors. The name on the tool must still mean something. As the modern era deepened, the company had to face a more complicated reality. Measurement was no longer purely mechanical. Digital indicators, optical systems, vision measurement, automated inspection, data connectivity, and quality traceability pushed the industry into new territory. A brand like Starrett could not live forever on nostalgia for the steel rule and the combination square, no matter how iconic those products were. It had to expand without losing itself. That is a difficult balance. Move too far, and you become just another measurement company competing against electronics specialists with different advantages. Move too slowly, and you become a handsome relic. What is striking is that Starrett is still remembered first as a company of practical precision. It is associated not with luxury, but with professional trust. That sounds small, but it matters. In the tool world, some brands are admired for extreme technical sophistication, yet feel distant from ordinary users. Others are popular because they are affordable, but do not inspire much respect. Starrett occupies a rare middle ground. Premium enough to be respected by professionals, familiar enough to remain part of everyday work. A Starrett caliper is not a museum piece. It is a working instrument, and that is exactly why it is respected. Seen more broadly, the Starrett story reflects a larger conflict in American industrial history. The conflict between low cost and long-term productive capability. For decades, Wall Street often rewarded rapid cost-cutting more than the patient preservation of technical capacity across generations. A company that keeps a factory in the United States, maintains skill, preserves in-house calibration, trains new workers, and protects accumulated know-how will naturally carry a heavier cost structure than one that focuses only on branding and outsourcing. In the short term, that can look inefficient. In the long term, it is often what creates resilience. Starrett became one of the rare American tool companies willing to place its bet on real manufacturing rather than only on brand equity. Atho, Massachusetts is therefore inseparable from the story. Modern consumers often think of brands as things detached from geography. But in precision industry, geography was once a school. A factory was not just where goods were made, it was where people were trained, where a standard of thought took shape, where quality was learned by touch and repetition. When you keep the original plant alive for well over a century, you are not just preserving brick walls and machine tools. You are preserving a chain of technical memory. Starrett and Athol belong together in exactly that sense. The phrase Tool Town, attached to Athol, was not a tourism slogan. It reflected a real industrial identity. The town was shaped by tool making and precision manufacture. In post-industrial America, places like that have become increasingly rare. Many company towns turned into economic ghosts after the factories closed. Athol did not escape every hardship, but Starrett's long presence kept the town from being severed completely from its industrial origin. There is a major difference between a brand that uses an old place name in marketing and a brand that still actually makes things there. Starrett leaned toward the second, and that is part of what made it stand out. Of course, the story should not be romanticized too heavily. Keeping production in the United States for 145 years does not make a company invincible, nor does it exempt it from the demands of a global economy. American corporate history is full of names once considered permanent that still decline through poor management, slow adaptation, or shifts in market demand. With Starrett, the deeper historical significance may be that it proved something many had begun to doubt. In certain technically demanding niches, quality, reputation, and manufacturing heritage can still create real competitive advantage. Not nostalgia, not sentiment, advantage. That is especially true in manufacturing. Outsiders sometimes imagine precision machining as mostly a triumph of machines. People inside the trade know better. It is a chain of trust. You trust the drawing. You trust the reference standard. You trust the cutting tool. You trust the setup. You trust the inspector. And above all, you trust that the number you just read is real. Starrett inserted itself at that fragile point. The company sold small objects, but those small objects anchored the confidence of entire systems. That may be the clearest way to understand why Starrett lasted. It attached itself to the most basic need in precision production, not to a single temporary wave of technology. Machine tools change. Materials change. Software changes. Supply chains change. But the question never goes away. Is this dimension correct? Every modern factory still has to answer that question, even if the tools have become more sophisticated. Because Starrett tied its name to that answer very early, it gained a historical advantage that is difficult to copy. From 1880 to the present, the company has passed through nearly every major phase of modern American industry. The post-Civil War era, the New England machine tool age, industrial expansion, 2 world wars, the rise of mass production, Japanese and Asian competition, the decline of domestic manufacturing, globalization, and then renewed interest in strategic production and reshoring in the 21st century. Larger, louder, and better capitalized names moved through those same eras and fell. Starrett was not always a spectacular growth story, but it was something rarer in industry, a story of endurance. And endurance is often harder than expansion. That is why the Starrett story does not end in the dramatic collapse that defines so many American industrial histories. It ends in continued presence. The factory in Athol remains a symbolic anchor. The Starrett name still appears on measuring tools. Machinists, apprentices, quality technicians, and shop owners still speak of the brand as a familiar standard. In an age when too many names survive only as intellectual property bought and sold from one corporate owner to another, that is almost a countercultural statement. And after 145 years, that is still the reason the name has not left America. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe to the Gear Archive, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.